The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 5th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak, and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you, and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. The Gospel of the Lord. So today's Gospel reading is the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, or what we usually call the Sermon on the Mount. We call it the Sermon on the Mount because Matthew sets the scene as Jesus goes up on the mountain and sits down and prepares to teach people. And we call it a sermon because it is very long. It goes on for 3 chapters, 3 entire chapters. We will not be able to finish reading it for the whole Epiphany season. It goes on for that long. But actually, what we call the Sermon on the Mount probably was not originally one full sermon. It's probably a bunch of different sayings of Jesus that Matthew has put together as a teaching moment for his readers. We know that because there are lots and lots of different sayings that don't necessarily relate to each other and they don't necessarily follow one another. So Matthew could have, in fact, begun this sermon with any of Jesus' sayings. And yet, he decided to begin them with something called the Beatitudes. And we call these things Beatitudes because it comes from the Latin word for blessing. All of these blessings that Jesus talks about. And at first glance, that seems like a really great way to begin a sermon. Let's talk about all of God's blessings and all the ways that God is going to bless you. Except that, on closer inspection, these words of blessing are not really happy words, and they're not addressed to happy people. These Beatitudes are addressed to people who are poor in spirit, who are persecuted, who hunger and thirst for a kind of righteousness and peace that they simply do not see in the world around them. They are people who feel reviled and persecuted and put down because they're just simply trying to be faithful in their daily, everyday lives. From the very beginning, Matthew makes it clear that the people that Jesus often addressed are people who are not necessarily happy people just waiting for God to give them heaven as dessert. Instead, the people Jesus encountered, the people Jesus talked to, were very often people who felt forgotten, left behind, and left out by their world, by their society, maybe even by their God. That is the messy and uncomfortable reality that Jesus addresses throughout the Sermon on the Mount. And I think that's why Matthew decided to begin this series of teaching with those Beatitudes. He pointed out that Jesus addressed head-on that the world that people live in is not the world as they would like it to be. He acknowledged that people feel hurt and betrayed. And he knows that people are often tempted to give in to anger and fear because they feel forgotten and left out and left behind. So perhaps Matthew chose to begin the Sermon on the Mount with these Beatitudes because in these words, Jesus acknowledges the difficult realities that so often we hope religion will give us a way to get out of. You know, God loves you, just pay no attention to this. Kind of like, think about heaven and don't pay any attention to what's going on around you. That's sort of often what we hope religion will do. But Jesus doesn't do that in the Sermon on the Mount. He addresses head-on the messy and often ugly reality that people face. In these Beatitudes, Jesus addresses people and says to them that, you know what, being faithful is not your ticket out of these things. In fact, being faithful may in fact put you in a position where you are more likely to encounter these kinds of situations. Because only people who really care about righteousness hunger and thirst for it. Only people who care about peace have the difficult task of being peacemakers. And only people who are willing to live their faith in their real everyday lives ever end up being reviled for it. In these words of Jesus, he addresses and he promises that God notices and that God cares, even in these horrible situations that people face. The real blessing of the Beatitudes is the promise that you are not forgotten and that you are not unnoticed by God, even and especially when you're going through these difficult kinds of situations. Jesus actually says that God is working through you at those moments when you are not happy, and when you're not feeling strong, and when you're not feeling appreciated. That's the actual blessing. God is doing something important, even through your weakness, often for somebody else. You are the agent of God's blessing when you are willing to put yourself in a position where you live your faith and get reviled for it. You are being God's blessing in the world when you are willing to be in the difficult position of being a peacemaker when everybody wants to fight. You are being God's blessing when you are willing to feel poor and beat up because you're willing to be an agent of God's healing and help in somebody else's life. And in these words, in this sermon that Jesus gives, he's actually also acting by standing with and supporting the very people who feel forgotten and left out and left behind. By his very presence with them, Jesus showed God's support and solidarity with people who felt that they had been forgotten. By his help and care, Jesus showed people that God had not left them behind. And by the ways that Jesus actually physically healed and fed and cared and befriended people, he showed them that they were not going to be left out of God's kingdom. I think that these words are really important words for us to hear in our world today as well. Because in our world, right now, there are a lot of people who feel forgotten and left out and left behind. Political movements in the U.S. and throughout the world, on both the right and the left, have been energized by people who, for various and sometimes good reason, feel like they and their concerns no longer matter. And because of that, there's a lot of anger and fear that's been expressed and stoked across our lives and across the political spectrum. And yet, while anger and fear can sometimes be momentarily energizing, they usually don't help us bring about the best solution. I know in my life, and probably in yours, when I have made decisions, when I am sort of angry and sort of fearful, even if I don't want to admit that I'm acting out of those things, those have not been the best decisions that I have ever made. And as followers of Jesus, I think the Beatitudes can point us towards a different way of living. It seems to me that if we're going to help people to tackle the problem of feeling like they have been forgotten and left behind and left out, then Jesus is also calling us to be people who acknowledge the difficult and sometimes ugly realities in which people live, even if we are not ourselves right now experiencing those realities. Part of this means that there will always be people who feel like this, no matter what we do or who wins an election. And part of our call as people who live the Beatitudes is always to ask the question, even if it seems like most of the people around us are feeling fine, who's feeling forgotten? Who's feeling left out? Who's feeling left behind? Jesus lifts up this, says these Beatitudes in the present tense, not in the sense of, someday this might happen to you or it might happen to somebody else. He says this is happening. This is happening to somebody right now, probably somebody sitting right here. Acknowledge the reality and be open and be aware of it. Listen for it. That's part of what it means for us to live these realities, live these Beatitudes, and be followers of Jesus. That also means that it's important for us to really listen to people who we don't usually see and we don't usually listen to. Whether that means that we're feeling for somebody or listening to somebody who's feeling excluded and left out because of their race or their religion, or somebody who feels like they've been left behind because the global economy, which has worked pretty well for many of us, has not worked so well for them. I think one of the things that I'm most concerned about when I listen to some of the stuff that's going on right now, and I stay off of Facebook some because of this, but there seems to be this idea that we're going to support this group of people who feels left out, or this group of people who feels left out, and not listen to everyone. And I think that Jesus listed out 12 verses full of blessed are you for when you feel poor, when you feel persecuted, when you feel left out, all of these things because he didn't want anybody to say, God cares about these people, but probably not these people. You know, if somebody came to you and said, I just came from the doctor's office and I have been diagnosed with cancer, you would never say to that person, oh, you know what, I know somebody with much worse cancer than you, and their diagnosis is much worse. You know, we don't have to worry about, you know, you wouldn't do that. But sometimes in the way that we talk, it sounds as though we're listening to, these people over here have a right to be heard, but these people over here, well, they don't have a right to be heard. Part of what Jesus did was to listen to everybody, to care for everybody. And part of living the Beatitudes is being people who really listen, even to the people that we're not usually in contact with. And that means for us too. Living the Beatitudes means that Jesus calls us to act, to be people who are agents of helping people find real solutions to the real problems that they have. That is a really, really easy thing to say in a sermon. And it's a really hard thing to do. Because most of the really hard problems that we face are not the problems that we have ever faced before. The problems that we faced before are relatively easy because I know how to solve those things. I've had solutions from the past. But very often the problems we're facing now are the problems that don't have fixed solutions that we can drag out from before. So part of what we're all called to do as followers of Jesus is to do what Jesus did. And what Jesus actually did was he took up the hard task of walking with people in their actual, real, everyday lives, experiencing with them the problems that they were facing that nobody else might have faced before. He helped them to think about life in a new way. And he was willing to help them live in ways that they probably had not envisioned before. That is what all of us are called to do, not only in our own lives, but to help others in their lives as well. That is the hard and difficult task of living the Beatitudes. But when we do that with others, then we help others to realize that they are not walking alone. They are not forgotten. They are not left out. They are not left behind. Jesus often addressed people who felt forgotten and left out and left behind. But when he did so, he promised them that God had not forgotten about them. He included them so that they knew they weren't left out. And he acted in ways that helped them to know that they were not going to be left behind. Jesus promises those same things to each and every one of us, even as he also calls us to live those things in our lives and to help others so that they know that they're not going to be left behind or forgotten or left